Let's talk about JPA. JPA stands for Java Persistence API, and it's a library that allows Java applications to easily interact with relational databases or databases in general. And the way it does it is that it allows you to map relational databases, tables and foreign keys and primary keys and fields, and allows you to map it very easily to a Java data model, right? And where implemented as a Java class. So a Java class might have a specific name, it might have certain fields, and what JPA does is that it maps the name of the class to a table. It maps all the fields in the class also to all the fields in a table. It allows you to very easily retrieve the data from a database, right, and read it into memory. So then you can then manipulate it. What we're going to be doing is using JPA to talk to a database, retrieve widgets and courses and whatnot from a database and instantiate them in memory, and then use a RESTful service that we discussed last time in the last lecture to then expose that data model that is stored in a relational database, expose it as a RESTful service for our React client. Okay, this is a very, very common pattern, design pattern, very common in industry where you have a React client or Angular client making RESTful services to certain controllers that then use JPA or some data access infrastructure to retrieve data from the database. We do need to do some configuration. We do already have a project already implemented in using Spring Boot, so we can skip over that. We do have to configure the Spring Boot application to talk to the database, right? We need to say, well, where does the database live? What's the URL connection string, the username, password, so that the Spring Boot infrastructure can log into a database and start interacting with it. There's a couple other configuration here. We can ask the JPA to create the database for us, right? So we don't even have to create the tables or the fields or the data types. We can ask JPA to do that. We can say, hey, here's a Java class. Please create the tables for me, right? And it'll send SQL commands to create the tables. And then if you instantiate a class instance in memory, you can then ask to save that instance in memory, save it to a database, and JPA will automatically convert that into a SQL insert, right? Or if you want to retrieve all the instances of widgets or courses from a database, you can say, hey, retrieve for me all the instances, all the records. It'll do a select star on that particular table. It'll iterate over the result over the records that come back. It'll instantiate in memory an array of those objects and then give you an array instantiation. Pretty cool. So let's see what we might have already configured here. So here's the Java project that we've been using from the beginning of the semester. And the configuration is done, if you follow under here that says main, notice there'll be a resources directory. If you open that up, there's an applications property file in there, which is currently empty. Okay? This is where you can configure the connection to a database, username, password, and so on and so forth. So let's grab a couple of those configurations. I'll just grab that and paste it in here. All right. And let's see. We don't need this right here. So the first one here, Spring Boot data source.url, points to wherever your database is running. Right? It will be either running on our local machine. So if it's our local machine, this might be localhost, and the database that we want to interact with. Right? I don't believe we have a database for this course, so let's create one. Let's see. We can start by bringing up MySQL Workbench, which I believe you were asked to install early on in the semester. You were asked to download and configure it. So here I have it running locally, and it's going to connect to my local database that is running on my machine. So here we can start to create a database for this course. So let's create a brand new database for this course. So this will be CS 4550, and it'll be maybe fall 2019, and we'll say apply. So there we go. So we have a database, right? So let's double click on it to make it the active database. There are no tables right now, right? It's empty. There's nothing we have created. we're going to do that from the Java side, right? So we're not going to have to do any SQL commands, no console, no anything. We can completely do that on the Java side. All right, so let's go here. If we go back here, and we know now the name of the database is CS4550 fall 2019, and the username, we can look at manage the users and see which users we have. Okay, it looks like I already have a CS4500 user. Let's create another one for this course, 4550. Add account, and this will be CS4550. Password, I'll also use 4550, very secure. And let's see, we'll give them admin rights so they can do everything. Okay, so CS4550 can do everything. Apply. So we have that user already created, has access to everything. We can now create the user here, 4550, and password is also CS4550. There's a couple other things that we can configure. We can ask JPA to say, hey, you deal with the schema of the database, right? You create the tables for me. You know, if they don't exist, create them from scratch, right? You know, take a look at the Java class, and for every class, create an equivalent table. For every field in that class, create a field in the table. Yes, all the columns and so on and so forth. This is okay as we play around and learn about using JPA, and as we're experimenting. We have to be careful that every time we restart the server, this create will drop any data that you had already in your tables, right? And it'll recreate the tables brand new from scratch. And that's very annoying if you already have, you know, a table where you have lots and lots of records, and you would lose all that information. Eventually, as we know, as we like the database and we don't want to recreate it again, you know, once we've done all our development and we feel confident of our database, we might want to change this to update. Updates will instead of recreating the table, it will make updates, right? So if you add a new field, if you create if you change a data type, if you rename something, it will only alter the table, right, as opposed to just dropping it and recreating from scratch. Okay, but for now, we'll use create. Just remind me to change it to update once we're done, right? A couple other things here that might be useful is that we have here some debugging information that JPA can write out to the console so that we can see what JPA is actually doing. We can see the create statements. We can see the inserts, the updates, the deletes, right? All the select statements, right? So it's very useful for us to, at least in the console, see what JPA is doing. All this magic, you know, how is it being implemented? It's very interesting to look at. Eventually, when this gets into production and we're done developing, we might want to turn this off, right? Once it gets deployed to a final destination, there's no need to, you know, litter our logs with all this debugging information. A couple other things that we need here. A couple other things I'm going to copy and paste it here. So there's a couple of things that can configure the naming strategy. So it's called the improved naming strategy. This maps the different naming conventions that are convention in Java versus the naming conventions that are in SQL. For instance, in Java, everything is case sensitive, whereas in SQL, everything is case insensitive. Yes. So in Java, it's very common that you camel case everything, right? So if you have a long variable, you might capitalize every single word at the beginning of a word. Yes. But that makes no sense in SQL, where there is no difference between capitalization and lowercase and capitalized words. So instead, in SQL, what we use is underscore. Yes. So this strategy here allows us to automatically do the conversion between these two naming conventions. All right. So JPA will handle all that naming convention, all these differences. A couple other things. JPA, you can configure it to talk to all sorts of vendors, database vendors. In this case, we're going to be talking MySQL, and every vendor has a specific dialect of SQL, right? You know, Oracle has a specific dialect. You know, SQL Server has its own dialect. And here we have to configure what do you want me to talk, right? I want you to talk the dialect for MySQL. There's a couple other configurations that are useful for debugging, right? Show more SQL, add, format it, add all sorts of white spaces so that I can actually read it. I do a lot of, trace everything that you do to the database, trace it and print to the console because we want to take a look at it. It's educational. So that's the first configuration. The second part of our configuration is going to be downloading and installing the library that implements JPA, and also a library that is going to allow our Java application to actually talk to a database. Right? So here's the to do that, we're going to do that in the POM file. Remember, the POM file is a file where we declare all the dependencies of our project. Yes, any libraries that we might need. So let's copy this, grab that, and we're going to head over to our POM file here. So let's go to POM, and in our dependencies, right here are our dependencies right at the bottom. I'm just going to paste those dependencies in here. Very good. Right, so what this does is that it's going to take a look at the it's going to look at go to the Maven repository and download the Spring Boot JPA implementation, right? The libraries that make all this magic happen, right? Plus, it'll go to MySQL, the repository, and download the library for MySQL, this particular version for my particular database, right? Whatever version you might have a newer version of MySQL. You might need a newer version for your library. Okay. All right. So we did that. We can head over to the console and do Maven clean install. So let's head over to CS 4550. Oh, 4500. Is this 4500 or 4550? I'm sorry? 50, right? Wait, where's our... did I name this wrong? I did. I've renamed it wrong, right? Huh. Where did I put it? Oh, I know. Sorry. CD webdev. Oh, there we go. It was fall. There we go. That's where I put it. All right. So our application is under here. So webdev, and we can do a Maven clean install. So what this is going to do, if you read through the through this log, it's going to download all the necessary Spring Boot JPA libraries plus the MySQL library as well. And it's going to install it locally in our local Maven repository. Okay, so it built successfully. That's good. So that worked. The next thing that we need to do is declare the actual data model that we want to store in the database. All right, so let's do that next.